You are listening to Malanikai. Thank you so much for joining me. I am so happy to have in the studio someone who is going to break down to me, a little embarrassing. It's an organization I should know more about, but I'm going to admit I don't know a whole lot about the mission and the interworkings, and I'm tired of just reading about it in the media. So I invited the president of the Georgia chapter of the NAACP in the studio to join me. He is attorney Gerald Griggs, and we're going to break down some things and talk about, it's going to be NAACP for dummies and then break down NAACP Georgia. Attorney Griggs, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's awesome to be in the studio with you to talk about such an important topic as the NAACP, but more specifically the Georgia NAACP. So as your listeners may or may not know, the NAACP is the oldest civil rights organization in the country. They were founded in 1909. After the Niagara movement and in response to the Springfield race riots. And the purpose of the NAACP is the advancement in civil rights for people of color, particularly African Americans. And so it's the leading institution that fights for voting rights and the expansion of civil rights and the protection of people's human rights. And so we cover a gamut of topics, voting rights, civil rights, environmental issues, making sure that communities are strong and there's investment in those communities. And of course, we stand on the front lines to protect against racial intolerance and police violence. So we do a lot, and we've been doing a lot for over 114 years.
We're talking to attorney Gerald Griggs. He is the president of the Georgia chapter of the NAACP. We're going to break down some things happening in Georgia that your organization is watching closely. But first, I have been told to ask you, and I have wondered about it at times too. When people use the word colored, people that aren't us, look like you and I, it seems to be derogatory. Is the word color in the NAACP something that should stand, or has the organization ever looked at it and said, hey, maybe we need to change that? Are you guys totally fine with that?
Well, the board makes that decision, and 64 members of the board believe that because of the brand strength, we should keep the term. And I agree with them. You know, when the NAACP was founded 114 years ago, that was the term for black people and minorities, colored people. And so for 114 years, we've stood on the vanguard to protect the rights of colored people or people of color. And so we believe that because of the strength of the brand and because of the historic nature, we should maintain that. But of course, we've changed to the 5 letters, which is NAACP, instead of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, specifically to make sure the brand remains strong. But I do hear the concerns of many people, and what I would point to them is the purpose of the name is to have the historic nature. I mean, you had Thurgood Marshall, you had Charles Hamilton Houston, you had W.E.B. Du Bois, you had so many legendary members of this grand association that were members. And so we don't want to lose that history. Of course, we have Ida B. Wells, who is one of the preeminent writers of lynchings over the 19th century. So we want to maintain that integrity, historical integrity, but also focus people that it's bigger than just a name. We are still fighting for the rights, civil rights, the social justice, and the maintenance of the things that our foreparents won and achieved.
You're listening to Malanikai. We're talking to the president of the Georgia chapter of the NAACP. He's breaking down what it is. Like for me, NAACP for dummies. I'm getting it right now. Let's focus now on Georgia. There are a plethora of issues, as I follow you, we watch you on national media, local media, that we are dealing with right here in Georgia. Name a few of them.
We're dealing with voter suppression. We're dealing with wealth inequality. We are dealing with rampant police violence. We're dealing with jail deaths. We're dealing with a lot in Georgia. And of course, we're dealing with economic development and the growth of people of color and the wealth disparities. So it's a lot happening in Georgia. And of course, the Georgia NAACP is standing on the forefront of pushing forward for advancement. So we filed multiple lawsuits attacking SB 202, which we term as a voter suppression bill. We've been successful initially in front of Judge Boulay with preventing the banning of line warming temporarily, and of course temporarily preventing the use of date of births on the outside of the mail-in ballot, so we hope that we will win the entire case. We also are fighting the gerrymandering that's happening, similar to what our friends over in the State Conference of Alabama were successful at the United States Supreme Court level with the Milligan case. So we're doing a lot, but there's a lot of work still left to be done.
Attorney Gerald Griggs, again, he is the president of the Georgia chapter of the NAACP. A big issue that is national news here in Georgia. It's made national news. It's based out of Georgia. Some people call it Cop City. Some people call it the public training facility for
public safety training.
Yeah, public. Where does the NAACP stand on the idea that, well, it's not an idea, it looks like it's coming into fruition, that there will be a police training public safety center smack dead close to the city?
Yeah, and so the NAACP has been clear since 2021 that we oppose the building of the Public Safety Training Center, also known as Cop City. We stand with the people in that the people should have a voice in whether or not it's built. And if the people decide it needs to be built, then it will be built. But what we want Atlanta to focus on is there have been way too many deaths at the hands of police violence. You know, Atlanta had the biggest civil rights demonstration in the history of this town. And that says a lot considering it's the birthplace of civil rights. The biggest civil rights demonstration over the deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and then ultimately Rayshard Brooks. And of course, we stood in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Brunswick, which started Freedom Summer, which is Ahmaud Arbery. So during that whole time span, 150 days outside, continuous protests, they were demanding police accountability. No one said police needed better training. They needed to be held accountable when they violated public trust. So we've told this to the mayor. We will continue to tell it to all elected officials. Until you address the police accountability, we can't even enter into the police training conversation. There have been more deaths since George Floyd than before George Floyd. And many people said, well, George Floyd would change the scope of this interactions with law enforcement, and we've learned so much. Well, if you learn so much, you learn from the people, and the people are saying we don't want to build a $90 million training center that will further weaponize law enforcement. Now, I did sit on the Public Safety Training Center task force about curriculum, and I was clear on the task force that they should have a conversation with the people, they should have a conversation with the activists, and that the Public Safety Training Center in its current iteration should not be built, one, at the location where it's going to be built, and two, in its current iteration. So until they have a conversation with the activists and until they have a conversation with the people, the NAACP is clear on its position. It shouldn't be built.
Attorney Griggs, I know you've heard this argument before many times. These people say they want police reform, but now they don't want a public safety training center. And I've always heard it as the way you explained it. It's not necessarily that we don't want it. If the people don't want, I live in Buckhead, so you're not putting that thing in Buckhead, and the people would rise up in Buckhead, and the people would say absolutely not, and the people would be heard in Buckhead. Is there a reason why, and I'll let you speculate, that the people, it seems like the people are not being heard in the particular community where this Public Safety Training Center, aka Cop City, is going up?
And that's a good question. I know the mayor would say that they are being listened to because he has a separate task force that's helping to plan that. But many of the people I've spoken to in that community are saying they're not being listened to. And the key thing about where they're building it, aside from the environmental hazards and issues, is that it's not in the city of Atlanta. It's in DeKalb County. And so for the people of DeKalb County not to even have a say in this is really interesting. And so if we are going to build a public safety training center, build it where the people want it. You know, if Buckhead is asking for more law enforcement to be better trained, then build it in Buckhead. But as you said, I think Buckhead would have a problem with that. If East Atlanta, not on the DeKalb County side, but actually in East Atlanta, will want it to build it, you know, talk to those people and see if they want it built there. But let's be clear. Nobody was asking for police reform during the George Floyd protest, during the Rayshard Brooks protest, during the Jimmy Atchison protest. They were calling for police accountability. Nobody was out there saying, oh, we need better training. Oh, train the police better. Nobody was saying that. And you know how I know that? Because I was outside for 150 days. I was there. I was on the Washington Street Bridge. I was in Centennial Olympic Park. We were there for 4 hours. 4 hours that day that it turned a little interesting. The 4 hours before it turned interesting, it was a peaceful, nonviolent protest with thousands of people. And I didn't hear one person say, we need better training. So what I think they need to understand is the people were saying, hold these law enforcement officers accountable. There's no reason why we have not gotten justice in Rayshard Brooks' case. We have not gotten justice in Kane Rogers' case. We have not gotten justice in Oscar Kane's case. We have not gotten justice in Jimmy Atchison and Veltavius Griggs and Alexia Christian, all the way back. These are the names that Atlanta was protesting about. I have yet to hear a politician say those names. It's easy to say Breonna Taylor. And, of course, we were in Louisville standing shoulder to shoulder for justice for her family. We were in Minneapolis, many of us, not myself, but many of us were in Minneapolis saying George Floyd. We were definitely down in Brunswick many days saying Ahmaud Arbery. But these cases happen in Atlanta. And so my question to Atlanta politicians who keep on saying, oh, we need police reform, when are we going to hold the police officers accountable that actually violated the public trust? That's what the people were demanding in 2020.
Attorney Gerald Griggs, the president of the Georgia chapter of the NAACP, you said something key. You're right. People protesting never said more training. I got to be honest with you. I think as a radio talking head, a media talking head myself, I think we started those conversations on the radio, on television, saying, hey, maybe they trying to find a balance. But you're right. I never saw anybody out there with the sign saying, give them more training. It was like, we want justice.
We want justice.
So I'm going to take credit for that. We started it, okay?
Because, the chants themselves, what do we want? Justice. When do we want it now? Nobody said, what do we want? Reform and police training. They did not say that. And let's be clear, in the city of Atlanta, since Rayshard Brooks, since George Floyd, there has now been Deacon Holloman. There has now been Nigel Cullins. And so if the city of Atlanta really wants to be about police reform and transparency, why have you not released those tapes? Why have you not shown the public what actually happened in these cases? So my question to the elected officials, both on council and the mayor, when are you going to be transparent about the continued killings that continue to happen? This is 2023, not 2020. 3 years later, we still are demanding transparency and accountability. So if you want to talk about reforming the police, let's start with police accountability.
Attorney Gerald Griggs, he is the president of the Georgia chapter of the NAACP. He's here right now, and he's breaking down NAACP, especially Georgia chapter, things they're dealing with, different issues and concerns. You've had these conversations with the mayor. Is the mayor clear on, Mayor Andre Dickens, clear on what the Georgia chapter of the NAACP wants?
He's absolutely clear on not only what the Georgia chapter of the NAACP wants, but what the Atlanta NAACP demands. And so my hope is that he will listen to the voice of the people. He will listen to the voice of the activists and sit down with them. I've made it abundantly clear. He needs to sit down with the activists and have a conversation about what they want and how we get there. Because many of the activists are the same people that knocked doors in 2020, in 2021, and in 2022 to turn out these epic elections that you see. These are not just random people. These are the organizers that put the blood, sweat, and tears into mobilizing folks to vote. Because here's what people fail to realize. The people that were outside marching changed the march. They marched to the polls, and they shifted Georgia elections. So for you now to mute the voices of the people, you're muting the voices of the voters. And let's be clear. If they have gotten 116,000 signatures, that's more than the people that voted in the last election. You need to listen to the voice of the people and not your political strategists, because I've been outside. I stay outside. The people want to give voice. Now, yes, there are people on both sides of this argument, but there's only one side of the let the people vote argument, and everybody's on that one. So if the people of Atlanta want to see a public safety training center built in its current iteration in the South River Forest, then put it on the ballot in November, and let's see what happens. This is a democracy. This is not a autocratic society. This is not a theocracy. This is not an elitist system where a few elites get to make a decision. This is about democracy. So let the demos, the people, make the decision.
How relevant, if you would take the NAACP, whether it's national, local, Atlanta, whatever, any of these chapters, if you were to lift the NAACP, if they were just to disappear totally, what impact would, let's stay in Georgia, do you think that would have in Georgia if you guys just disappeared?
No Ahmaud Arbery case, no historic voter turnout in 2020, 2021, 2022. If you took away the national NAACP, no Dr. King, no E.B. Du Bois, no Medgar Evers. We wouldn't even know who Emmett Till was. So when we talk about the relevance of the NAACP, it is extremely relevant. It is extremely timely, and we need to grow our membership so everyone knows that you would be afraid to deal unjustly with the rights of black people and people of color. And so when I hear people say the NAACP is not relevant, I just simply look at the 2022 election where we sent for the first time in Georgia history for a full term an African American senator. Let's be clear, this was a slave state. This was the 13th colony. They had never done that. Because of the work of the units, because of the work of our partners, because of the rapid mobilization of the vote, we changed Georgia history. But this is not the first time. When you heard about a jogger in Scintilla Shores that had been gunned down by 3 armed vigilantes, the first people to make the call was John Perry of the Brunswick-Glenn County NAACP in partnership with Wanda Cooper Jones and Marcus Arbery and their attorneys, Ben Crump and Lee Merritt, to let the world know that something had happened in Brunswick. That was because of the work of the NAACP and all of our partners. And so when people say that, I chuckle because I stay on the road. I know the work that the units are doing, whether that's in Cartersville or Savannah, whether that's in Chatham County. You remember those 2 cases, the jail-involved cases? That's the Chatham County. That's the Camden County NAACP. Chatham, all the work they've been doing in Savannah. And so I look around the scope and vast scope of the Georgia State Conference, 100 branches, 100 adult branches, 40 youth and college, and we are very strong. But I also want people to understand we have to do a better job of branding ourselves. Many times the NAACP does not take credit for the work that we do. We need to do a better job of that to lift it up to the people so they can know where they need to come to when there's an injustice. And so I would just simply say, if you want to see the work of the Georgia State Conference, read your local paper.